The recasting of actors happens frequently, but performers somehow injuring themselves out of a role entirely is rare. From broken bones and torn cartilage to career-ending back problems and crushing corsets, here are some of the performances that might have been. It's a well-known film fact that Sean Young fumbled her chance to play Catwoman in Batman Returns by showing up to the Warner Brothers offices dressed in black latex, jumping about, and bursting through doors screaming, "I'm Catwoman!" But this wasn't her first shot at Tim Burton's Batman universe. Young was chosen to play journalist Vicky Vale in 1989's Batman, a huge opportunity for her. She was worried about one scene in particular, however, a romantic horseback riding date with Michael Keaton's Bruce Wayne. If this doesn't sound familiar, it's because the scene was cut from the final film, but not before Young was asked to learn how to ride a horse. During a training session that took place a week before the start of production, she fell off her horse and fractured her arm.
I couldn't hang on. I just couldn't hang on, and there's kind of a poetic symbolism about that.
Producer John Peters quickly sent her home and brought in Kim Basinger. In a 2021 interview with the Daily Beast, Young said that the situation could have been handled better, conjecturing, "Could they have kept me on the show and shot around my arm? They probably could have." She went on to say that Peters was the one who was keen on bringing in Basinger, sharing, "He saw an opportunity to exit me, and he did. And no one ended up being very happy with that choice. But it is what it is. I had an accident and then got walked to the door." Nicole Kidman was at the height of her stardom in the early 2000s, so much so that she occasionally had to navigate back-to-back shooting schedules. In 2001, Kidman starred opposite Ewan McGregor in Moulin Rouge, a movie musical directed by Baz Luhrmann that drew inspiration from several different classic operas to tell a mostly original story. Luhrmann populated it with a number of hit songs from different decades, including a pop rendition of Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend. This song required many of the actors, Kidman included, to execute a breathless, highly technical dance sequence. During one of the takes, Kidman fell and tore the cartilage in her knee. Kidman also broke 3 ribs during production, 2 while shooting another high-intensity dance number, and a 3rd from wearing an extremely tight corset. But the knee injury lingered, bothering Kidman to the point that she had to drop out of her next movie, David Fincher's Panic Room, 2 weeks into filming. That's when it was discovered that Kidman's knee injury was worse than the doctors previously thought and hadn't been allowed to heal properly. Kidman decided to leave the project to focus on her recovery, and the role went to Jodie Foster. However, Kidman seemed to have little regret about how much damage she took making Luhrmann's film. In 2014, she told Yahoo Entertainment, "I'm dancing in high heels, I broke my ribs, I tore up my knee, I did all the things you're meant to do while creating great art." Cameron Diaz struck gold in 1994 when she starred opposite Jim Carrey in The Mask, a critically and commercially successful crowd pleaser that also served as her feature film debut. She became one of the biggest names in Hollywood almost overnight. As such, she needed to pick her next project well, which is why she's likely happy that an injury stopped her from appearing in the 1995 adaptation of the video game Mortal Kombat. The producers of Mortal Kombat were struggling to cast the beautiful, deadly character Sonya Blade. Like The Mask, the film was being made by New Line Cinema, so they were invited to watch advance footage of Diaz before anyone knew who she was. Speaking to The Hollywood Reporter, associate producer Lori Appelian recalled, "As soon as we saw the dailies from The Mask, there was no question that she was a star. We put her into training because she had not really done this kind of martial arts work before. She broke her wrist right before shooting to the point where she couldn't do the martial arts stunts we needed." With Diaz out of the picture, Bridget Wilson Sampras was offered the role of Sonya, though she had to go through several rounds of auditions first. In her interview for The Hollywood Reporter's oral history of the film, Wilson Sampras shared, "The casting process was really long. I went back and auditioned and met with them so many times, probably 7. It's difficult to imagine anyone but Clint Eastwood in the role of no-nonsense cop inspector Harry Callahan from the Dirty Harry film series. Eastwood played the role in 5 films from 1971 to 1988, cementing himself as one of the defining figures of the neo-noir movement.
Why do they call you Dirty Harry?
Well, that's one thing about our Harry. Doesn't play any favorites. Harry hates everybody.
Part of what makes him so perfect for the character, and the genre, is his trademark steely glare, which is impossible to replicate. However, the Dirty Harry films may have been quite different if it weren't for an injury to the original star, Frank Sinatra. Back when William Friedkin was still in the director's chair, the first film was meant to be a star vehicle for Sinatra, with the main character modeled after him. But after 6 months of development, Sinatra pulled out. The crooner broke his wrist while filming The Manchurian Candidate and had yet to recover to the point that he was able to wield Harry Callahan's now iconic Smith & Wesson comfortably. A number of other stars were reportedly offered the role before it came to Eastwood, most notably John Wayne. However, Wayne and Sinatra famously didn't get along at the time, and Wayne is said to have refused to even consider the project because, according to Collider, he didn't like being offered Sinatra's rejections. George C. Scott, Burt Lancaster, and Steve McQueen all turned down the role, and Robert Mitchum called the script a piece of junk when it landed on his desk.
I guess that's supposed to scare me. Like if I screw up, I may miss out on that 110th movie.
Paul Newman was also approached, and while he didn't fancy it himself, he's the one who told producers to consider Eastwood. Dick York began his acting career as a teenager and went on to become a star of the stage, screen, and, for a time, radio. Things really took off for him when he landed a lead role in the ABC sitcom Bewitched. He played Darren Stevens, a regular guy who winds up marrying a real-life witch.
You're a what?
I'm a witch.
York was lauded for his performance on the show, even netting a Primetime Emmy nomination in 1968. It likely surprised viewers then that York was replaced just a year later by another actor named Dick Sargent. It all stemmed from a back injury York sustained while working on Gary Cooper's Western film They Came to Cordora. During a scene in which York and Cooper were operating a railway handcar, an extra accidentally leaned on the mechanism York was lifting, causing York to suddenly go from lifting nothing to lifting the body weight of a grown man. In a 1992 interview with Film Facts magazine, he said, "The muscles along the right side of my back tore. They just snapped and let loose. And that was the start of it all. The pain, the painkillers, the addiction, the lost career." Eventually, the pain and his addiction to prescription medications caught up with him. York collapsed on the set of Bewitched, and producers felt they had no choice but to replace him.
I just want you to take a few days rest. You'll come back a new man.
But I don't want to come back a new man. I like me as I am.
He fell on hard times in the years that followed, but he held no ill will, saying, "I've been blessed. I have no complaints. I've been surrounded by people in radio, on stage, and in motion pictures and television who love me. The things that have gone wrong have been simply physical things." Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, is a Cold War satire directed by the legendary filmmaker Stanley Kubrick. Though it may be funnier than most of his films, it's in many ways no easier to watch because of its razor-sharp, nihilistic sense of humor. In other words, it's the sort of movie that makes you laugh and despair at the same time.
That is precisely the idea, General. That is precisely the idea.
Part of what makes Dr. Strangelove work as a piece of entertainment is the brilliant Peter Sellers, who plays not only the film's titular nuclear scientist, but two other major characters as well, Captain Lionel Mandrake of British Royal Air Force and United States President Merkin Muffley. One might be forgiven for assuming that Sellers' multicasting was a deliberate artistic choice, but it was actually Columbia Pictures that insisted upon Sellers playing not 3, but 4 main characters in the picture. In their infinite wisdom, execs determined that Sellers and Kubrick's previous collaboration, Lolita, was successful only because it had Sellers doing a bunch of different characters. So, what happened to Sellers' 4th role? He was set to play the tough Texan Major T.J. King Kong despite some apprehension. Sellers wasn't particularly confident that he could pull off a Texas dialect.
An old Ripper wouldn't be giving us Plan R unless them Ruskies had already clobbered Washington and a lot of other towns with a sneak attack.
During production, however, Sellers sprained his ankle, a massive hindrance when it came to playing a character who spends most of their time scrunched up in a fake cockpit. Rather than have him fight through the pain, producers agreed to keep Sellers to just 3 roles, and they brought in real-life rodeo star Slim Pickens to fill in for him. Probably the most memorable and high-profile recasting on this list, Ruby Rose lasted only 1 season leading the Arrowverse series Batwoman before she was unceremoniously written off and replaced by an entirely new character, played by Javicia Leslie.
New Batwoman.
When her departure was first announced, it wasn't terribly surprising. Rose, fresh off a John Wick film, was arguably getting too big for the Arrowverse, and the first season had been the target of a review bombing campaign by a group of fans who were unhappy with Rose and the show's direction. According to Rose, a major part of her decision to leave the show came after she severely injured herself doing a stunt. Despite having to undergo surgery, producer Peter Roth allegedly forced her to return to set before she could fully recover. She claimed this contributed to an already taxing workload that eventually led to burnout. Rose also went on to accuse Roth of behaving inappropriately with women, and she also said that co-star Dougray Scott verbally abused females on the set. Warner Brothers reacted with a strongly worded statement that positioned Rose as the real troublemaker, claiming, "The truth is that Warner Brothers Television had decided not to exercise its option to engage Ruby for Season 2 of Batwoman, based on multiple complaints about workplace behavior that were extensively reviewed and handled privately out of respect for all concerned." Scott also spoke out to defend himself, adding, "I absolutely and completely refute the defamatory and damaging claims made against me by her. They are entirely made up and never happened." After starring in the hit films Heathers and Beetlejuice, Winona Ryder became one of the most sought-after actors in Hollywood. She was busier than ever and beat out competitors like Julia Roberts and Madonna for a role in the highly anticipated The Godfather Part 3. Ryder was cast as Mary Corleone despite not being able to attend rehearsals, as she wasn't yet done with her commitment to the comedy Mermaids. Accompanied by her then-boyfriend, Johnny Depp, Ryder arrived at the set in Italy just in time to prepare for her first scene. Her co-star, Andy Garcia, noticed that she looked extremely tired, and before the two could be properly introduced, she told production she wouldn't be able to work and left the set. The next day, Depp called in sick on her behalf, which effectively withdrew Ryder from the film. Reports eventually came out that she'd suffered a nervous collapse. The part of Mary Corleone would ultimately be played by Sofia Coppola, the daughter of director Francis Ford Coppola. Her performance in the film was heavily criticized not just for being a clear instance of creative nepotism, but for her overall poor performance.